the zoology identified for that plant will hold true. Now, tea isn't actually tea. Hey guys, it's Jess. I'm super excited to be filming this video today because it's got some of my favorite plants here. You probably can see from these fins, but they're the whale fin Sansevieria, also renamed now to the Dracaena, which is pretty exciting stuff, or pretty exciting stuff in the plant kingdom, to have a whole genus of plants be renamed, which is like, I think it's a pretty big deal. But guys, I've got my collection of whale fins here, and all my whale fins had babies, so I think I've doubled my pot of whales, which has been really exciting. So I've got these guys here, this one here, and I've got one on the floor because he's really tall. He's about 45 centimeters tall, but he's this one here, and he's got a little baby coming out. I wanted to do a video on my whale fin Sansevieria, or the Dracaena. I think I'm gonna still call them Sansevieria, or at least whale fin Sansevieria, because I don't know, I've gotten used to calling them Sansevieria, but the correct genus is now Dracaena. But I wanted to do a care video, and I actually was debating whether or not to do a care video on snake plants, because they're quite popular house plants, and there's actually a lot of information. Sorry, just finding the right angle. There's actually a lot of information out there on the internet, so I didn't know how helpful it would be to do a video on caring for snake plants, but I still wanted to do a video on care tips for the whale fin Sansevieria, mainly just focusing on some of the more uncommon tips that you might not hear when you're doing your own research. That is obviously those tips which are just based on my own personal experience, so please take that with a grain of salt, because of course where you're keeping your snake plant might be different from where I'm keeping my snake plant. But also guys, another really exciting the other reason why I wanted to do this video is because I wanted to show everyone my variegated snake plant, which is this little baby here. This is literally my pride and joy. I went through hell last year with him, because he actually, if you can see, he actually died, and I was so devastated because, as you guys might know, the variegated whale fin are actually quite hard to come by, and I had been looking for one for maybe about 5 months or so before I actually saw one at a reasonable price, and to think that I'd almost killed it, it just broke my heart. But I thought it'd be also a good video to give you guys some care tips on the variegated whale fin, or at least my experience with him, and how I was able to, I say I was able to, but I'm sure, you know, this little guy is a fighter, so he was able to come back to life. So I thought I'd start off with just talking a little bit about their name change, which was one of the reasons I was sort of motivated to do this video, because I didn't think it was often that you hear about plants and their family names changing. So a little bit of background for that is the taxonomy, so the naming conventions for plants will change if one of 3 things happen. The first one is that the oldest documentation or name takes precedent for that plant. So if an older document has been discovered with a family name that's different, then that name will take precedent. The second reason for why a plant might be renamed is because it was misnamed in the first place, and so it's been renamed to actually rectify a mistake. And the third reason for why a plant will be renamed is because it's been reclassified, and that's attributed to as the knowledge and science around plants grow, then scientists or botanists will change their perceptions or how they might classify certain plant in a family group that's more suitable to its plant's characteristics. The entire Sansevieria family has been renamed to the Dracaena family. So about 70 species of Sansevieria is now Dracaena, which is quite crazy, right? Like, that's a really big change. I'm sure, I mean, I'm just a novice and hobbyist plant enthusiast, and I'm sure plants get renamed all the time, but to me that blows my mind. It's sort of like saying that tea isn't actually tea. So the whale fin is quite popular for its paddle-like leaves, which is one of the reasons why I love them so much. They're just so cute. They normally grow in just a singular sheath like this, and their pups are just so cute and stout. They're one of my favorite shaped plants. I'm actually on the market for a whale fin with a wide over sheath that I can find, so I'm hoping to keep my eye out for one of those, or I want to get a really tall one. This guy is 45 centimeters tall, but I'm really hoping to see what's the tallest whale fin I can find. Sansevieria, they're quite popular for a number of reasons, because they purify the air, they release oxygen at night by taking in toxins during the day. Sansevieria do flower, and so they will give off these little white flowers. My Sansevieria have yet to flower. Sansevieria are actually quite easy to take care of, and there's a lot of information out there on the internet about taking care of them. So what I might do is just give a quick rundown of the really common house plant tips for Sansevieria, but then go into some more specific ones that I found have been helpful for my whale fin. So from lighting, these guys sit in quite well lit locations. They get full morning light up to about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and then during the afternoon they don't get direct afternoon light. If you have whale fin that's a little bit darker compared to whale fin that's a little bit lighter, the lighter ones need a little bit more light than your darker ones, and this is particularly if you're planning on keeping your Sansevieria in a dark part of your house. You just want to be mindful of the light that you give your plant. In terms of watering for your Sansevieria, as you may know, this is known as an indestructible plant, and you can afford to be a little bit more lax in your watering schedule. I water these guys really when I see that their soil is quite dry, and I haven't watered my Sansevieria yet because I wanted to show everyone what dry soil looks like, but I hope that shows you that's quite dry. If not that one, then this one. The whale fins I have here haven't been watered for about a week or so, and they sit outside, so be mindful if your plants are sitting outside. Of course, they're going to dry out a lot easier. When you water your whale fin, these guys, when they grow, when they have pups and offspring, is that they have little conical shapes in here, which I think might be true for most Sansevieria. But when you water, you don't want to water in here. You don't want the water to get in here, because what happens there is that the water will take a lot longer to evaporate. It can make the plant susceptible to root rot, and root rot is probably the biggest concern for this plant. One thing I will say about the whale fin, particularly with the variegated whale fin, is I know I said at the beginning that you can afford to be a little bit lax with your watering schedule, but as we enter into winter, you still want to keep in mind how often you're watering your plants. The rule of thumb for winter I've seen on the internet says between 6 to 8 weeks. Again, be mindful of where you're keeping your plant. If you've decided to keep your plant outdoors in winter, you might need to water it every 6 weeks versus 8 weeks if you're keeping it inside the house. A little story about this guy, that root rot is probably the biggest pest for your Sansevieria, and that's the reason why you want to avoid watering them in their little cups And because I was so afraid about my whale fin, my variegated whale fin getting root rot, I withheld watering quite a bit, so much so that he started to dry out, and that actually led to his untimely death. So a lesson learned from that is just be mindful. You can't let these guys dry out because they will die. Don't treat these guys like cacti. You do still want to water them over winter, and you don't want to let them dry out. That looked like he was literally drying out versus root rot, because your fin becomes a lot more mushier. Drying out is when you can definitely see the fin really harden, and it looks dried out. I don't know if I've explained it well. So try and bring your whale fin back to life when it's really been burnt to a crisp or it's been dried out. Once the fin had dried out completely and when I lost all hope, you can see that's where I cut the fin. I kept this tuber in a quite a dark location that was dry, and I'd water him about once every 8 weeks. I allowed the soil to really dry out so mold and bacteria couldn't form, and then when it was springtime I brought him back outdoors and I kept him outside and I watered him. I gave him a little bit more attention, and then he grew this guy back up. So guys, I guess the takeaway here is over winter you do want to keep your tuber, even though it looks like he's lifeless. Don't chuck him out yet, because in spring and summer he might grow back. So keep him warm, still give him a bit of water, but make sure that water dries out. In terms of air circulation, these guys actually do quite well in stuffy rooms, which is another reason why they're so favoured as houseplants. I keep my plants outdoors, so they do have the benefits of fresh air, but if you do keep your plants indoors and it is in a room that's a little bit more closed in, it might not have as much air circulation. Don't be too worried about it. This plant can also do quite well in the bathroom, so it also doesn't mind that elevated humidity. In terms of temperatures for this plant can do quite well in a variety of temperatures, so it makes a really good house plant. It can tolerate lows of pretty low and highs of about 40, so these guys don't do well in frost. So for everyone who goes through winters where there's snow, make sure to bring your guy indoors over winter. I've kept my plant outdoors all through the Australian summer. I didn't hear many complaints for him. However, I would say that he doesn't sit in full afternoon light, which is probably a reason why he didn't get too burnt over summer. A sign to see if your whale fin is getting too dry is definitely look at the, I don't know if you guys can see, but look at the outlines. You want to look at the rim of your plant. So as that orange bit or brown bit of your plant gets bigger and thicker, that is a sign that your plant is drying out or is getting too much sunlight. So that's something to be mindful of. Another example is if you see the top of your whale fin, and it's starting to get these sort of hairy bits, and the dry bits where it's sort of flaking off, that is another sign that your plant is a bit too dry. And so what you want to do is, one, water him because you might have forgot to water him, and just be mindful of how much sun he's getting. In terms of soil for this plant, I keep my whale fins in quite well draining soil. I used a high mix of orchid bark because orchid bark is quite chunky and it allows the water to drain out quite quickly. I would say I use about 80% orchid bark and 20% perlite, and maybe a little bit of dirt here and there. But I've also read that a good succulent and cacti mix can work well for this plant. But I would just be mindful that when you do go get a bag of succulent and cacti mix from commercial nurseries, I tend to find those mixes still to be quite water retaining. So you do then want to just make sure it's quite aerated by putting in some perlite or pumice or orchid bark. In terms of repotting, you don't need to rush too much to repot these guys. I haven't repotted my whale fins, even though I'll show you this one. This guy has 3 fins now. There's still a lot of space for him here, and I've had this guy for about a year or so. If you're keeping this guy outdoors, 2 to 4 years is a good amount of time before you need to repot. Of course, if your plant is growing tremendously and its pot is starting to look a bit deformed, then you probably want to repot your plant. If you're keeping it indoors because it'll grow a lot slower, then I've heard anywhere between 5 to 8 years is the time frame that you want to repot your plant. But always listen to your plant, look at your plant to see if he needs a bit of a repot. In terms of fertilizing, what I use for these guys is an all-purpose synthetic fertilizer that I dilute at 50%, and I fertilize these guys in spring and summer during their growing months. What I do is when I start noticing a pup that comes out like this, increase the frequency that I fertilize him. So in summer, when I saw all these pups coming up, because I watered my plant once every week, I'd also fertilized him once every week. And you'd be amazed at how quickly these fins grow. It's crazy. And what I found that by fertilizing them when their fins are growing, sometimes they can throw up not just the one fin, but they can throw up 2 extra fins, which is so cool. So definitely summertime is the time when new pups come up. And with fertilizing, my tip there is if you do want your fins to grow quickly and grow more of them, then definitely fertilize them. I've heard that worm compost is also another great fertilizer for this plant. I haven't been able to access any compost or worm compost yet, but if you do, give that a go. In terms of propagation for this plant, you can propagate by dividing the tubers, and how you want to do it is when you see a pup come up like this, with a sterilized knife that you'd sterilize with alcohol, you can then do a clean slice through the tuber to propagate the plant. Make sure that you're cutting utensils so your knife is sterilized, because as I mentioned before, root rot is probably the biggest pest for this plant, and you don't want to be introducing any bacteria or fungal when you actually go and cut that tuber, because you are in a way harming the plant when you propagate him. So guys, I hope you found these tips helpful for caring for your whale fin Sansevieria. Let me know if you have any questions, guys, or drop me a DM on my Instagram at Jessie Potplants. Otherwise, I will see you in my next video. Bye.